Hello, everyone, and welcome to Classical Revolution. My name is Rachel Fenlon. For those of you just joining today, I'm a soprano and a pianist based in Berlin, Germany. And this series with IDAGIO is kind of all about why and why not when it comes to creativity and boundary pushing in classical music. And I am so excited to welcome today's guest. She is a personal inspiration to me for so many reasons. She's a soprano, conductor, educator, innovator, and truly an artist in every sense of the word. Today, when I was preparing for the interview, I was walking and I was thinking, you know, having a show about breaking rules and pushing boundaries in classical music and not having this person on the show is kind of like having a birthday party and not inviting the birthday person. So I'm really, really excited to have her here. Rediscovering her discography. It's amazing how vast her repertoire is. Everything from Handel and Haydn to Nono, Berio, Ligeti, George Benjamin. She's performed over 80 world premieres. And I think without further ado, please welcome Barbara Hannigan. Hi, Barbara.
Hi, Rachel. It's great to see you. Great to be here.
It's so nice to have you here. Thank you for being here. I like to start every episode off with asking my guests what their introduction to music was and what sort of sparked that lifelong passion and devotion to music. So what's yours?
Well, yeah, my introduction would have been early childhood, babyhood. My mother played the piano and she sang, and as far back as I can remember, she had us around her. So my sister, who's 14 months older, my twin brother Brian, and me on her knee at the piano, playing and singing and encouraging us to sing. And this would have been, you know, long before we could speak, we were singing. And which is beautiful, because then you're remembering melodies before you're remembering the melody of words, you know, so it's like your or language. And so that was my earliest musical experience, and going to sleep at night with my mom playing Handel's water music on the piano, you know, dum bum 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 bum. And so whenever I hear that played by an orchestra, I think, well, that's not the real version. You know, the real version is my mom downstairs on the piano. And yeah, and then of course, you know, school music, Waverly, Nova Scotia, the school at the end of the street, wonderful music teacher, Hope McEwen, Hope Moen now. And private lessons and so on and so forth. But I mean, it really started at home and then at school.
Amazing. And I mean, something that sort of set you apart, certainly at the beginning of your career, was your commitment to new music. And I'm wondering, yeah, if you could talk a little bit about that and what brought you to new music, whether it was, yeah, what brought you specifically to new music?
I mean, I remember, you know, those Royal Conservatory piano books with grade 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you know, had to take your selections for your piano exams and so on. Well, I remember, I don't know which year it was, but there was this little piece by Kabalevsky called A Little Song. Da 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 dum da dee da dee. Da 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 dum da dee da. Strange little piece. And I remember playing that and my mother coming into the piano room and saying, "Oh, Barbara, you're so good at the modern music." And I didn't think of anything as far as when it was written or time, you know, what century or anything. It wasn't part of the way I thought about music. And I suppose all through my school years, we did all kinds of music, folk music, stuff that was more angular, stuff that was more lyrical. I knew that I didn't like strophic songs. I didn't like songs that had verses very much. That always bored me, and still to this day, I'm not crazy about it. Yeah, and I'm not crazy about theme and variations. I'm like, get it over with. Let's hear something new. So, but then when I moved to Toronto, I was 17 years old, and I moved to Toronto to go to one of those performing arts high schools, the Etobicoke School of the Arts, for my last year of high school. And that was when I met Mary Morrison, who is a phenomenal singing teacher in Toronto, Canada. She's still teaching well into her 90s now. Yeah. And she took me on even before I'd finished high school. And I remember auditioning for her and singing, I think I sang Delius for her, and which I suppose was also modern music kind of. And I think she noticed that I had a high level of musicianship. I had a very good ear. I had really good ear training in Nova Scotia from my piano teachers and at school. And that I think was very interesting to her, because she always liked to have really good musicians in her studio. And so even at that time, she was encouraging me to explore now modern music, which in Toronto was very different than the modern music that I was hearing in Nova Scotia, played by Symphony Nova Scotia. You know, I was now able to go to concerts and hear, you know, composers like new works. You know, this had not been part of my experience. And I even remember when I was in my last year of high school, if I'm correct, Boulez came to Toronto with Ensemble Intercontemporain, and I was 17 years old, and I was like, what is this? You know, it was really special sounds, and I was discovering that kind of music at the same time as I was discovering Mahler, you know, the big symphonic works. So there was like an openness.
Yeah.
And I mean, even my graduating recital of high school, of this performing arts high school, I commissioned a set of songs by a young composer. So that was my first world premiere, was when I was 17. And when I went to university, I was working with all the student composers. I was also gigging a little bit. I was doing some solo work with new music concerts. I worked with a group called Continuum in Toronto, and Array Music. So I mean, I was 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, really all the time. A big part of my energy was going towards modern music, like premieres. I would say premieres more than the existing meat and potatoes of modern music. Like I didn't start singing, you know, those works, let's say Webern, until a little bit later. But definitely it was really my passion, and I would look around and I could see that all the other singers weren't doing that. And so I felt a kind of obligation to sing the modern music. I thought, okay, if I love this, then I think it's like I have to do it. I have to serve it, because otherwise who's going to look after it? You know, you don't want to look after something you don't love. So it was like a care that I felt for this music, that I wanted it to be okay. I wanted it to be treated well and respected and raised well.
Yes.
So that's kind of how it began.
And it's led you, I mean, do you feel like, that was something I was wondering today, do you feel like that starting, especially now that I know you started at 17 with new music, that's really, really young, actually. There's a flexibility in new music that exists because it doesn't, well, it's new music. We're not bound to some kind of tradition with performance practice. And do you feel like that set you up also, because of course, as we'll get to in the convo, but you've broken so many traditions in a way. And do you feel like that kind of set you up to have a flexible attitude towards classical music? Or
well, I think it's good you say the word tradition, because for me, I found when I got to Toronto and I started university, and then we had like the leader class, we had the oratorio class, then we had French song, we had English diction class, we had all the classes, and there you would learn, you would present a song every 2 or 3 weeks to your teacher. For French, it was Rosemarie Landry. It was Greta Kraus for leader. It was Douglas Bodel for oratorio. I mean, these were fantastic teachers. And I felt uncomfortable because I felt like there was some kind of tradition that I didn't know about, and it made me
Mhm.
nervous.
Mhm.
Whereas in modern music, there was not a tradition of how do you sing this piece,
Yeah.
because nobody else had sung it yet, or very
Yeah.
few people had sung it yet. So I did feel more free, and I feel like my voice developed more through singing modern music because I felt I could take more risks. And
Yeah.
when you take risks, you make progression, you know.
Mhm.
If I'm nervous and contained, I'm not going to be free. The voice isn't going to release itself. So I needed something that let me take risks. And
Yeah.
so I had this very high instrument, and yet at that time, if you had asked me to sing Queen of the Night, I would have been really, really scared. And then I did sing it, and I was really, really scared. Um, but if you asked me to sing a modern piece that had all the same notes and all the same demands, virtuosic demands, I would I would be more like, bring it on, I would feel more confident. So it
Mhm.
it really was it opened so much for me. It
Yeah.
really did. And it was a struggle because um that angular music doesn't always lie beautifully in the voice. It's very demanding,
Right.
but I mean, let's look at a Mozart concert aria. Some of the Mozart concert arias are near impossible. They're
Yeah.
also angular and
Yeah.
demanding. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I also wondered, I mean, now that you say that about the modern music and the vocal
Mhm.
demands, something I'm curious about for you personally is, especially as you've commissioned so much work and you perform so much still new music, um, are there ever times where you perform something that actually doesn't feel like a fit in the end, or you've commissioned
Mhm.
something and then
Yep.
you kind of still have to go through the project, and
Yes.
what does that feel like?
Well, that's happened. That's happened a few times, and
Yeah.
even in the last 10 years, it's also happened. And I think it's a really I mean, of course, that if you're going to commission a new work, you don't know what you're going to get. You can't say to a composer, write me a piece just like the last one you wrote, because I love that.
Yes.
You can't do that. They have to write what they need to write. And they're on a path too.
Yeah.
They're on a career and a path and an exploration of their art. And sometimes they have to go through periods of writing or creating something that is really different than what they did before. And they cannot be bound to recreate. So it's always a risk. You never, I mean, there are some composers
Mhm.
that kind of do recreate the same thing and you always know what you're going to get, but they're not the ones I'm so interested in.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I will digress for a moment because my biggest mentor, I would say, who wasn't a singing teacher for me, but was a colleague and a guide and a kind of lodestar, was the Dutch conductor and pianist and composer Reinbert de Leo. And he started the Schoenberg Ensemble, and we worked together many, many times in recital and also him conducting me. And often I would bring pieces to him that I was singing. And I remember at one point I brought a piece to him that I really didn't feel comfortable with. And he looked at it and he also didn't feel that comfortable with it. I mean, he didn't have to perform it, but he thought, yeah, it's problematic. And then he
Mhm.
explained to me very clearly why we must go through with the premiere that we have committed to. Because indeed, I didn't want to go out there and be embarrassed. I didn't want to go out there with a piece that I didn't feel would be successful. I was part of so many kind of hits that I didn't I didn't want to lose face. There's ego issues as well. And he said, you
Yeah.
have to,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And he said, you have to allow the composer the possibility of failure. And you have to accompany them on that journey because it is part of a journey. And through this experience, they will develop into their next experience. And you cannot only be looking for success with every piece. You're part of a process.
Yep.
And I thought this was extraordinary. And I loved it because it really gave me a feeling of, yes, this is a vocation, you know? And so I do go through with premieres, and sometimes I'm gritting my teeth, or sometimes, you know, it's really frustrating. Or sometimes you don't realize until like the fifth performance what was the one thing you needed to change, and then it would have been better. And sometimes you can even change it, you know, that's also special.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have had pieces that I haven't adored. I've always tried to find something in them to love. And if I couldn't find something to love, then I would find some technical aspect that I wanted to work on, that I would work out through singing that piece. So I would always find something in it that would create a kind of chemistry between me and the piece, whatever it was. You know, in some pieces that's really easy because I just adore the pieces, and other ones are more like a puzzle, and I've got to find my way in.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah, he was amazing. He was extraordinary. Yeah.
I mean, you have also some beautiful recordings with him.
Yeah.
That I was rediscovering. I just going back to that, also that thought about failure. It's of course something that we think about a lot as artists. And I actually love that also because it also gives you permission. That mentality also can give you permission to fail as well. And that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of holding on to our successes is not very useful, because then we're living in the past. And so vocally, it's necessary for us to be really in the moment of our singing. And that being in the moment requires a lot of discipline and preparation. But if I have a really great top C in a show or in a rehearsal, if I try to recreate that, I'm only setting myself up. I need to follow the path to that high C, but I can't end game towards that high C, or it's just, I mean, I can guarantee that it's not going to work, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'd love to talk about one of the things that makes you from all of your repertoire and that, but also is the fact that you're a soprano and a conductor. I'd love about that moment that you really decided that, or the moment that you first experienced singing and conducting, and what that felt like, and what that path to that pursuit was for you.
Yeah, I mean, I never really, early on, I didn't decide to be a conductor. I decided to accept a challenge to conduct the Ligeti Mysteries of the Macabre and sing it at the same time. It wasn't my idea. It was the idea of René Bosque at Radio France at the time. And it was a great idea. And I thought, yeah, that can work. It's a piece about a control freak. It's a piece I know inside out. I wasn't getting bored with the piece, but I did feel, you know, there were a lot of people kind of starting to copy me a little bit with the piece. And I had this wonderful idea of how to perform it. And I thought, okay, well, why don't you copy this then? And so I started singing and conducting it. And the first time I did that, the very first time I did that was actually at a birthday, at Reinbert de Leo's 70th birthday. As a joke for him, but I knew that I would be singing and conducting it a few months later. So I mean, I had several engagements of this, and yeah, I mean, I think I was more nervous that I would not give acceptable gestures to the orchestra, and I didn't really know how to talk to them, and that was interesting because I didn't realize that I didn't know how to talk to them until, I mean, that's the thing with conducting. You don't learn what your weaknesses are until you're in front of the orchestra. And then you realize, I don't know this and I don't know that. But you don't realize what you don't know until you're out there in front of them. So that's really, it's, it's a very exposed place to be. So I do understand why some conductors build up these really big egos, because you're so vulnerable, but everybody's vulnerable. So and kind of on the official debut, I also only conducted a piece, which was Le Renard, the Fox by Stravinsky, for 4 male soloists in chamber orchestra. And that for me was the hard thing. That was the, I mean, doing Ligeti Mysteries, to sing and conduct it, I mean, it was a step, and I had to memorize the piece. So that was something. But conducting only, that was a different feeling. That was, I felt a feeling of care. I've often described it as a kind of parental feeling, like neither mother nor father, but a feeling of needing to make sure everybody was okay. And that was, I remember feeling very emotional before I went on stage for the Stravinsky, and in a way that I hadn't felt before. And it was a good feeling. It was less ego driven than singing, when I would get nervous for myself. So when I began all this, it wasn't that I was making like a career change. I was just doing this, having this experience. I'd agreed to this couple of engagements, and then, it was a hit. It was successful, let's say. I mean, the Ligeti was a hit, and I didn't, I didn't embarrass myself in the Stravinsky, and it was clear that this was something that I could, develop for myself. And I liked it very much, because it meant that there was a whole new repertoire opening up for me as a conductor that I never would have approached as a singer. And so that's been extraordinary. I mean, I think many pieces, one whole genre that comes to mind are Haydn symphonies, because as a singer, I was never really fond of Haydn's vocal music. I never really got into it. I sang Jahreszeiten, and I remember learning all the arias from Schöpfung, and I was like, well, not really my thing. But then the symphonies are operas. They're extraordinary. They're operas without words and without singers, and there's so much character and storytelling. I mean, conflicting storytelling, but it's extraordinary. And so for me, I mean, and I'm so happy there are so many of them, because because this is something I can really, spend the rest of my life working on, and that's amazing.
And it must have been such I mean, you say it opened up a whole new world of repertoire, but did it also open up also a different relationship with music, or a different, I mean, how did your relationship with music change, do you feel, now that you have these two components to yourself?
Yeah, it got deeper. I think it's like the enriching of a relationship. It became more profound, and I feel more serious about it. It feels more sacred, even more sacred. I mean, music has always been sacred to me, but when I started conducting, and it's important that I still use my voice as well. I mean, I still need to be singing, because the singing informs how I conduct. And if I don't have the singing going on in me, I don't conduct as well. Even if it's a purely instrumental piece, I need to feel it inside. And I've realized that if I often will warm up my voice before I go into a only conducting rehearsal, because it changes the way I conduct. Yeah. And also, again, I had the issue with tradition as far as conducting went. I was you know, not at the very beginning, but soon after the beginning, I did take some lessons and continued to get a lot of advice from wonderful mentors and colleagues. But I was really at my best, I think I am at my best when I'm incorporating the music in a similar way to that as when I sing it. And it's as if I become the character of the music. And that doesn't mean that I'm painting it on top of. It's something very deep, and it's not
very
something,
internal.
that's right. It's not something that you show. It's something that you feel. And
well, as singers, I mean, we vibrate, right?
Yeah.
We literally physically vibrate. So it's that experience with music is actually very profound.
Yeah, it's a kind of resonance, you know, and resonance on a lot of different levels. So I think at one point I was having a hard time with a rehearsal somewhere, and I often would call Simon Rattle during the process of, especially first rehearsal days. You know, he was mentoring me and helping, encouraging me, and later on he taught me as well. And he said, you know, you just have to be the Ligeti girl. And what he meant was, because when I conduct the Ligeti, the gestures they just explained themselves. I mean, I didn't have to think about how I was going to do something. It declared itself to me. And so I took that advice quite well. I mean, I also would ask myself, because Lulu, of course, the role of Lulu is such an important role for me. And she is, in a way, a very strange but dominant role model for me. So I would also often ask myself, how would Lulu do it? Because she's so true to herself. And that's what I think works so well with orchestras, is that the players as a group, not individually, but really as a group, they sense authenticity. So one must really be authentic in themselves, whatever that is for each person. There's no formula. And that's why I think conducting, we see so many different things going on, and we don't understand why it works. You know? And yet, in many cases, it works when you can't see a clear beat. You don't really know what's going on, but there's something going on that connects in an authentic way to this piece, and therefore we understand. You know?
Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah.
There's I was reading an interview. I was kind of just reading and watching some of your past interviews, and there's something really beautiful that you say in an interview with The Whole Note in like 2015 or 14 or something. And you say that the experience of performance, you call it witnessing.
Yeah, witnessing.
Yeah. And the audience together are witnessing. Talk a little bit about that and why that.
Okay, I think I'm going to keep talking. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, you can hear me okay? I heard the question. Are we okay?
Did you hear the question?
Continue? Yeah, okay. I heard it. Okay. So yeah, witnessing. And I think it was around 2000 and maybe 11 that I started feeling like that quite deeply about music. And so I would make choices on stage, even in concert works, because a lot of the concert works I did with orchestra as a singer, I was the only soloist. It was mostly pieces for soprano and orchestra. And I remember when I was on tour with Boulez, and we were doing Plis Selon Plis, which is a major work of his for soprano and orchestra, 60 minutes long. And they asked me if I wanted a chair, because you don't sing for the whole piece. And I said, no, I don't want a chair. Because, and it became clear that I needed to be in complete and utter presence the whole time, and with the players. And so sitting and standing, it breaks the the perception, it breaks the way you resonate. Sitting is relaxing, standing is being present for me. And so, and even in rehearsals now, I never take a chair. I always tell the stage technicians to please take the chair away if I'm the soloist, because I don't like to ever sit down. I like to really be present, even if there's long periods when I'm not singing. So the idea of witnessing kind of started for me then. And I realized how it was a kind of, it encouraged the audience, I think, to listen in a different way. And I think I started to feel like everything we do is in the round, you know, no matter if it's a shoebox concert hall or something like the Philharmonie in Berlin, where they really are surrounding you. But I started to feel like everything was surrounding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this also had to do with my perceptions of when I'm singing for an audience, you know, sometimes we go out to them, and it's actually, I think, much more powerful when we invite them in. It's more respectful of their intelligence and their abilities of perception, I think, than going out, displaying, inviting, so bringing in. So it's like an embrace. And so this witnessing for me then became, you know, even in performance, I remember that Whole Note article was around the time that I sang Die Soldaten, and I'd already sung Lulu, and I was now singing Die Soldaten, which is really, it's a violent role to sing. It's extraordinary. And it was in Munich. And that was a piece of witnessing, you know, that piece written by Zimmermann in the 1960s was really so beyond music. I mean, or if we think about music as perhaps as Schopenhauer and Nietzsche think about music, that it, in a way, it is our spiritual place. It is our sacred place. It is, you know, I wouldn't say it replaces the church, but for some people it does replace the church. I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
is, you know, so yeah, witnessing, that's basically how I think all the time. And
Okay.
and I'm witnessing someone else's sound. So it's co-resonance, right? I'm with their sound all the time. I'm as a conductor, but also as a singer. I'm resonating
Mm-hmm.
with everybody. I'm, you know, and when I'm not there, when I'm not fully present, I mean, it's really, I feel like I've let myself down, you know. So I really try, not during the rehearsal, but I try just to make sure that I'm in the state that when we go into this sacred space of rehearsal or performance, that I'm really fully witnessing what they do, and it influences everybody else in the room. It influences all the
Yeah.
energy. It's, you know, yeah, it's infectious.
Well, and it's also something that you're doing together. It's something you're doing with the audience.
Mm-hmm.
There's a connection. There's a feeling
Yeah.
that you're all doing something together. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't have to do with display. It has to do with invitation,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
And maybe an openness as well, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't necessarily know what to expect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. I think we're almost running out of time, which is, I wanted to talk to you about so many things, and it always goes like that.
Yeah, but we've talked about some good things. I like the topics that we're talking about.
But something I definitely want to just at least chat about quickly is, you know, we talk a lot about how certain composers or certain music can feel revolutionary. And the importance of that, and maybe especially at a time. And I'm wondering how you feel about that, and whether there I mean, which composers do you feel like music can be revolutionary? What's your attitude towards that?
Well, I think there are some composers whose music really was intended, for example, to have a political impact, or was used during their lifetime for that. Verdi, for example. Nono was Luigi Nono, composer from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean, his music was protest music in a way. I mean, very modern protest music. And I mean, if we look at the Barbara Adagio for strings, you know, that everyone heard in Platoon, and that was, I think it was played at Kennedy's funeral and at Princess Grace's funeral, and it seems to have become a kind of anthem for times of mourning. I mean, that's also, I don't think it's a revolutionary piece, but I think it's used in a particular way. I think music changes in its, in what it represents for us, for each person individually. And it depends on our state of mind, our relation to the world, I mean, if I think about the Ligeti Mysteries of the Macabre piece that I've done so many times, every performance was different because I was always in a different place in my life when I sang the work. And I particularly remember I guess it's the video that probably more people have seen, where I'm wearing the schoolgirl outfit. Well, that performance was right after the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris. And I was in Paris singing something else the week before, at the time of the Charlie Hebdo attacks. And then I went to London to sing the Ligeti, and I was, of course, extremely disturbed by these attacks. And I remember talking to Simon Rattle about it and speaking about the nature of the Ligeti piece, which is about totalitarianism, and it was about, and it was a revolutionary piece. Politically, it was a revolutionary piece, this opera, The Grand Macabre, that Ligeti wrote. I mean, it was revolutionary in every way, what boundaries he was pushing when he wrote that work. And, you know, I think it really has its own resonance at each time and at each moment. And I think to impose something upon it would be wrong. And that's also why, for that particular performance, I was so upset by the attacks that I had decided that I needed to change the costume, and I had decided that the schoolgirl costume made sense to me because it was a costume that was so distracting that no one would suspect that my character was the chief of the secret police. I mean, it was it wasn't just a gratuitous shop. But I wanted to wear something more serious. And I remember speaking about it with Simon, and we were discussing, you know, how the piece is a combination of anger and humor and violence and silliness. And so I had to find a way to balance that. And so I made that statement at that time, which I think for me was the right statement, because it created the right equilibrium inside me at that moment. And it also electrified the piece in a way that I had never experienced before. So, but you know, one other example I'd like to give is of the last concert that I attended as a listener, which would have been at the end of February at the Maison de Radio France. And John Adams was conducting the Orchestre Philharmonique de Radio France, and Vikingur Olafsson, you know, was playing, the pianist. And at one point, he played a solo piece by Philip Glass. And I've never been had any major affinity to the music of Philip Glass. I just didn't connect with it. So I was kind of, okay, let's get this over with and then move on. And Vikingur came on stage and he started playing the Philip Glass. And it had such an enormous impact on me. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I started to cry during the performance. And I was like, what? How, you know, I have never been moved by the music of Philip Glass before. And the way Vikingur played it, we had dinner after the concert, and he had found a new way in. And he had changed things in the piece. He had changed accents with permission eventually from Philip Glass, but he had changed in a way the structure of the piece. But it was revolutionary, what I heard in that performance. It was revolutionary. And that astounded me, because I sat there with my mind made up that I wasn't going to enjoy this and I was going to have to endure it, you know, and so on. And why was Vikingur playing this piece? And how wrong I was, and how overwhelming and unforgettable that musical moment was. And the communion of that hall at that moment, it's another hall where he was surrounded, and it was extraordinary. I mean, everyone was breathing with him while he played that piece. And it was an incredible meditation of extraordinary intensity.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I think, unfortunately, we're out of time. I would love to chat for hours with you, but alas, that is all we have for today. But
we can do a sequel another time.
Exactly. Yeah, because there's plenty of other things I want to hear about. So Barbara, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for asking me.
It was really, really a pleasure. And for everyone listening, I created a playlist today of just some of my favorite pieces that Barbara's recorded, and you'll find that in the link with underneath this episode. So thank you so much, Barbara, again, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Okay, see you.
Bye.
Bye.